The earliest form of the Socialist Party as we know it was formed in 1897 as the Social Democracy of America by a group of people led by Eugene V. Debs. Their goal was to transition the U.S. into a socialist society, though in 1898 they split into two factions, one that wanted to accomplish it by creating socialist colonies in the West, and those who wanted to accomplish it via political action. The latter faction, choosing to call themselves the Social Democratic Party of America, they started establishing local parties in Chicago and Springfield, Illinois. By 1900, they had built enough support to run a presidential ticket comprising of party leader Eugene V. Debs for president and ordained minister Job Harriman for vice president. They managed to get 0.63% of the popular vote, which was actually more votes than the oldest socialist party in the U.S., the Socialist Labor Party. However, on July 28, 1901, the Social Democratic Party of America sadly disbanded. Then one day later, they reformed to create the Socialist Party of America. The Socialist Party was prominently seen as a coalition between labor unions of the North and disaffected populace of the South. So when the 1904 election came around, the Socialist Party fielded a candidate to appeal to those people. Debs was easily renominated, but this time, printer Benjamin Hanford was chosen to be his running mate. They managed to get 2.98% of the popular vote. Later, in 1908, Debs hoped that a wobbly Bill Haywood, who was notable for being acquitted for the murder of Governor of Idaho Frank Sutenberger, would run for the nomination instead, but Haywood declined the nomination. Meanwhile, there was a more increasing divide between the more moderate Social Democrats of the party and the more radical Socialists of the party, and there was only one man who could bridge the divide between them, Eugene V. Debs, who was easily renominated for president, and Ben Hanford was chosen again to be his running mate. Though at the convention, some delegates voted for perennial socialist candidate James F. Carey, Minister Carl D. Thompson, and the editor of International Socialist Review, Algie M. Simmons, instead of Debs. When the general election rolled around, Debs managed to receive 2.83% of the popular vote. In the 1910 midterm elections, the Socialist Party started seeing major successes, the first being the election of Emile Cedille as mayor of Milwaukee, being the first socialist mayor of an American city, and the second being the election of Victor L. Berger, the guy who introduced Eugene V. Debs to socialism, to the U.S. House of Representatives, being the first sewer socialist elected to any office. For those who don't know what that is, sewer socialists was a term that describes social democratic members of the Socialist Party located around the Milwaukee area, due to the fact that they always talked about how they fixed Milwaukee's sewer system. Rather impressive showing for the Socialist Party, especially considering we live in a country where socialism is seen as just as bad of a word as. But anyways, now moving on to the more important thing, the interesting election of 1912, which we all know led to the creation of another political party, was now underway. Unsurprisingly, Debs got the nomination of the Socialist Party again. And in order to cash in on the fames of the 1910 midterms, while still following the U.S.'s constitutional requirements to be president, Emile Cedille was chosen to be his running mate. The Socialists, unsurprisingly, had little money for their campaign, Debs' campaign only raising $66,000, mostly spent on 3.5 million leaflets and traveling to rallies organized by local affiliates. The biggest rally was held in New York with 15,000 people in attendance. The crowd at one point even started singing the French national anthem, La Marseillaise, due to Debs having French parentage, as well as them singing the prominent socialist song, and even at one point, Emile Cedille was quoted as saying in a speech, "Only a year ago, working men were throwing decayed vegetables and rotting eggs at us, but now all has changed. Eggs are too high. There is a great giant growing up in this country that will someday take over the affairs of this nation. He is a little giant now, but he is growing fast. The name of this little giant is Socialism." But while all this was going on in the Socialist Party circle, there was a lot of infighting between the progressives who wanted to help Teddy Roosevelt versus the Republicans who were backing William Howard Taft, and insults were being thrown out left and right. But don't worry, Debs has you covered, because he even has some insults, and rather surprisingly, since Roosevelt is already throwing insults left and right at the Woodrow Wilson and William Howard Taft, Debs actually decided to aim his insults towards Roosevelt, being quoted as calling Roosevelt a charlatan, mountebank, and fraud, and his progressive promises and pledges as the mouthings of a low and utterly unprincipled self-seeker and demagogue. Now, as I went over in my video all about Eugene V. Debs, despite the fact that he was for labor activism since its inception, labor unions chose to endorse Woodrow Wilson, possibly due to Wilson being endorsed by William Jennings Bryan, who was rather popular amongst progressive, populist, and even socialist circles. Now, despite this, they managed to get 5.99% of the popular vote, winning 4 counties and getting second place in Florida, though unfortunately, Victor L. Berger lost his re-election bid. In the 1914 midterms, the second and last Socialist Party member was elected to Congress, Meyer London. Meanwhile, when the 1916 election rolled around, it was expected that Debs would run as the Socialist Party candidate for president again. However, Debs decided that he'd run for Congress in Indiana's 5th Congressional District instead, paving the way for 3 more candidates to run for the nomination. They were Pennsylvania State Representative James H. Maurer, newspaper editor Arthur Lesser, and another newspaper editor, Allen L. Benson. Benson managed to secure the nomination, and anti-militarist author/activist George Ross Kirkpatrick was elected to be his running mate, though perennial candidate Kate Richards O'Hare also got considerable amount of support for the vice presidential nomination. During this time, the Socialist Party, much like the rest of the country, was divided on the issue of World War I. The party itself took an anti-war stance, and it caused a rapid decline in membership, with the more radical members joining the Communist Party and the pro-war socialists forming the National Party, a short-lived coalition between the populists and the progressives of yesteryear. Benson and Kirkpatrick found some middle ground by saying that they were going to institute a referendum to decide whether or not the country should go into World War I. By the end of the election, they managed to earn 3.19% of the popular vote. Meanwhile, in Congress, Debs managed to get 17.17% of the vote in the district. Things aren't looking so great for the Socialist Party right now. If you thought 1916 was a bad year for the Socialist Party, oh boy, wait till you hear what happened in 1918. First of all, membership of the party dropped from 83,284 members to 74,519 members. Then the Sedition Act of 1918 passed 48 to 26 in the Senate and 292 to 1 in the House, the one vote coming from Meyer London himself. The passage of it made criticism of World War I and Woodrow Wilson a crime. Doesn't really bode well for an anti-war ideology like socialism, and as a result, many socialists were prosecuted for speaking out against the war. First came was Victor L. Berger, who was convicted and sentenced 20 years in federal prison under both it and the Espionage Act due to the fact that he was German. And it just so happened to be while Victor L. Berger was running to get his seat back in Congress. Man, this must have really hurt his results in the election. Actually, no, he got 43.66% of the vote and won his seat back. But when he went to serve his seat, he was forbidden from doing so because of his sentence. So they had a special election to reseat his Republican replacement, William H. Stafford, but that special election resulted in another victory for Berger, so they just left that seat vacant. But more importantly, came the arrest of Eugene V. Debs after giving an anti-war speech in Canton, Ohio. I won't go too in-depth into that case, because Mr. Beat did already. All I'll say is that it disenfranchised Debs for life, meaning that he could no longer vote again. But just because he couldn't vote for president didn't mean that he couldn't run for president. And that's exactly what he did. Yes, Debs ran for president while he was in prison, even using the opportunity to criticize the U.S. prison system. Civil liberties lawyer Seymour Stedman was chosen to be his running mate. By the end of the election, Debs got 3.41% of the popular vote, the highest amount of votes cast for the Socialist Party, but not the highest voter percentage. Later, during the Harding administration, Harding released Debs from prison. Maybe he'll run again in the future. After Debs was released from prison, he decided to forego future presidential runs due to his declining health. Though Debs was elected to be the Socialist Party chairman, this left the Socialist Party in a bit of a conundrum because, well, that means they lost their one charismatic guy to be their nominee. What are they going to do now? Well, luckily they had an out this time around because the Conference for Progressive Political Action was getting a lot of left-wing parties together to support a candidacy for Robert M. La Follette Sr. The Socialist Party decided to take them up on their offer due to the fact that they didn't really have a candidate of their own to hand out. So much like other people in this coalition, La Follette was their candidate for president, and Montana Senator Burton K. Wheeler was their nominee for vice president. In most states, it was mostly a fusion ballot line. However, in California, they were the only ballot line for the La Follette campaign. By the end of the campaign, they managed to get 16.61% of the popular vote. After their coalition with the Progressive Party didn't work out, the Socialist Party needed a new figurehead to reinvigorate the Socialist Party. It was expected that Debs would be that figurehead, but he died of heart failure. After that, they had a lot of trouble finding a new candidate. Suggested candidates were Victor L. Berger and party chairman Morris Hillquit, but neither were natural-born citizens. Another suggestion was the 32nd mayor of Milwaukee, Daniel Hohen, but he was more interested in staying mayor, and with only 8,000 dues-paying members, their options were rather limited. Eventually, at the Socialist Party convention, they nominated Presbyterian minister and perennial New York candidate Norman Thomas to be their candidate for president, and trade unionist James H. Maurer was nominated to be his running mate. While at the time, the Russian Revolution was making socialism a dirtier word than it already was, Norman Thomas got the Socialist Party a lot of admiration due to his attire and oratorial skills. He frequently talked about how democratic socialism was not only different from communism, but would benefit America a whole lot more than communism. It angered revolutionary socialists in the party, as well as communist figure Leon Trotsky. While he originally admired the revolutionaries, he quickly became a member of the anti-Stalinist left as Stalin's power grew. By the end of the election, Thomas got 0.73% of the popular vote. Not as much as Debs, but Debs is a tough act to follow. 1932 was a realigning election. It realigned many voters to the parties that had never supported before, but that's for later. First, the Socialist Party convention. The Socialists renominated Thomas without any hesitation, and James Maurer was nominated again to be his running mate. There was a problem with electing a chairman, though. As Thomas teamed up with the radical pacifists, the Sewer Socialists, and a young Marxist group called the Militants to oppose Morris Hillquit's bid to be chairman again. But it failed, so Hillquit remained. Thomas had to again reiterate the difference between socialism and communism, especially considering William Z. Foster of the Communist Party and Vern L. Reynolds of the Socialist Labor Party weren't helping differentiate the two ideologies. By the end of the election, he got 2.23% of the popular vote. By the 1936 election, the New Deal was in full effect. While many people on the right were criticizing it for being a socialist program, most people were rather supportive of it, especially progressives on the left, though there are many people who were to the left of Roosevelt who felt that it wasn't going far enough. Most prominently was Louisiana Senator Huey Long, who was slated to run against Roosevelt in the Democratic primary, or possibly start his own political party and run in the general election. But he was assassinated, though Long's friend, populist radio host Father Charles Coughlin, chose to create a new political party to bring Long's platform into life called the Union Party. Republican Representative William Lemke was chosen to be the Union Party candidate, and former District Attorney of Suffolk County, Thomas O'Brien, was nominated to be his running mate. Though as the party grew more and more, Coughlin started adding planks to the platform such as anti-Semitism, despite the fact that neither Long nor Lemke were anti-Semites. A new political party trying to mooch off of a very popular ideology while simultaneously introducing anti-Semitism into its platform? Doesn't this sound familiar to anybody? Now I'll answer the question that you've all been waiting for. Why am I talking about this when this is a video about the Socialist Party? Well, originally, the Socialist Party was going to be the pro-left anti-Roosevelt party, but the Union Party showed up and decided to espouse anti-Semitism too. So the Socialists had to denounce the Union Party's anti-Semitism as well as show how they would be better at combating the Great Depression than FDR. In order to do this, they needed Debs 2.0, and Norman Thomas was nominated again to be their candidate for president, and dairy farmer George A. Nelson was nominated to be his running mate. Due to the Union Party's newfound notoriety, Thomas only got 0.41% of the popular vote, as opposed to Lemke's 1.95% of the popular vote. It is possible that if Lemke wasn't there, Thomas's percentage wouldn't be higher, but we all know what happens when you assume. By the 1940 presidential election, one thought was on America's mind. Will we get involved with another world war? Roosevelt said, meh, probably not. Willkie ignored the issue while claiming that Roosevelt was lying, while the Socialists gave a firm no. It helped that party leader Norman Thomas, after taking a tour of Europe, was bent on reinvigorating the Socialist Party, starting by removing the Trotskyist/Youth faction, which later became the Socialist Workers' Party. Then followed up by an anti-war campaign for president. Thomas was easily renominated, and economics professor Maynard C. Kruger was nominated to be his running mate. Now, even though this election wasn't as nasty as others, Thomas decided to join in with some of the harsh language and called Willkie the Wall Street war machine, and that he would take us to the war about as fast and about in the same terms as Mr. Roosevelt. By the end of the election, Thomas got 0.23% of the popular vote. In 1941, Thomas testified in Congress against the Lend-Lease program, calling it a bill to authorize undeclared war in the name of peace and dictatorship in the name of defending democracy. However, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he decided that he would reluctantly support the war. But he rightfully criticized the Japanese internment camps, calling out both FDR and the ACLU, of which he was a member, for supporting it. The Socialists, of course, nominated him again for president, and former Pennsylvania State Representative Darlington Hoopes was nominated to be his running mate. Now, since being anti-war was off the table, he had to campaign on different issues. He later decided to focus his campaign on fighting against racial segregation, environmental depletion, and anti-labor laws and practices. The campaign was also in favor of birth control and opening the doors to Jewish victims of the Holocaust. By the end of the election, he managed to get 0.16% of the popular vote. 1948 was a strange year for socialists, as the Second Red Scare and the Cold War was in full effect, so all left-wingers had the possibility of being prosecuted for being a secret communist. Thomas avoided prosecution because he did such a good job differentiating democratic socialism and communism. However, Henry Wallace made the error of allowing communists to join his campaign, and as such, many people accused him of being a secret communist spy, a claim that Thomas also perpetuated when he ran against Wallace. Oh yeah, as well as Adlai Stevenson and Dwight D. Eisenhower. But who cares about those two? It's not like either of them became president. Economics professor Tucker P. Smith was chosen to be his running mate. Thomas used this campaign to show that the anti-Stalinist left needed to be at the forefront of social reform. He also used this campaign to bring criticisms to the Israeli government for their treatment of the Arabian people, a position that was made even more evident after a certain crisis that happened later. By the end of the election, Thomas managed to get 0.29% of the popular vote. When the 1952 election rolled around, it was expected that Thomas would again run for the presidency. But to quote every modern-day media pundit when they talk about Bernie Sanders, he was too old to run for president, so Thomas decided to heed this advice from the future. And that led to another power vacuum on who the next presidential candidate should be, or even if they should remain a political party at all, because people who were just reaching the age to vote now didn't remember the likes of Eugene V. Debs. The only socialist that came to their mind when the word was said was Joseph Stalin. The Socialist Party decided to nominate 1944 vice presidential candidate Darlington Hoopes for president, and labor activist Samuel H. Friedman was chosen to be his running mate. And even though I stated that a lot of younger people only knew of the likes of Joseph Stalin when you said the word socialism, they still had many young prominent members such as Tom Kahn and Michael Harrington, who decided to get more involved with the civil rights movement alongside Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, which actually helped the party stay around just a little bit longer, due to the fact that when socialists want to talk about helping the poor and helping the needy, it really hits home with a lot of African Americans. Because historically, a lot of programs that are similar to socialism, such as welfare, were rather helpful to African Americans, and many socialist movements were already in full support of civil rights longer than any of the two major parties, despite the fact that the Democratic Party was now trying to be the party of civil rights. Took you long enough. Despite these bumps, Hoop only got 0.03% of the popular vote. Pretty bad for the Socialist Party. By 1956, the party had shrunk very much. So much so that the same question as before sprouted up. Should we even stay a political party? They decided, screw it, we'll give it one more shot, and if it doesn't work now, well, bye-bye Socialist Party. Again with Darlington Hoops as their presidential nominee, and Samuel Friedman as his running mate. By this point, the Socialist Party was not on America's mind anymore, and even if it was usually in a negative light. By the end of the election, they managed to get 2,128 votes. Yes, a very, very poor showing for the Socialist Party. After that, they merged with the Social Democratic Federation and became the Socialist Party Social Democratic Federation. Yeah, I know, very confusing name. They didn't run or endorse any presidential candidate for years, though eventually the SPDF eventually endorsed the candidacy of George McGovern in 1972, which angered Michael Harrington. And by December of that year, the party decided to split off into 4 different factions that ended up becoming 4 different political groups. The Marxists in the party joined the World Socialist Party of the United States, a far-left group founded in 1916. Some members left to create the Democratic Socialist Organization Committee, an organization focused on democratic socialist causes that lasted until 1982, when it merged with the New Left organization, a New American Movement, to create Democratic Socialists of America, which is now the largest democratic socialist organization in America. The majority of its members, including Bayard Rustin, left to create Social Democrats USA, an organization intended to help unite social democrats across the United States. But the most prominent group, excluding DSA due to the fact that DSA has a lot of members currently in Congress, which was led by Darlington Hoops, goes by the name Socialist Party USA, a new political party that would run candidates for political office. To which I respond with, hold on a second. You literally disbanded the last one because you weren't that popular, and now you're just going to create a new one and barely change the name? We'll get to them in a future video. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more political content from me, you can go to my website or follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Quora. What are your thoughts on this Socialist Party? Do you like this one or the second one better? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below.